Thank you, Dave, so much for that amazing introduction. And thank you so much to the Conscious Capitalism staff and the board for having me here today. I have to say, the past couple of days have made me let my guard down. I just stared into somebody's eyes for a minute and thought about love. I'm a management consultant. We're not allowed to do that. So thank you for giving me a safe space and being part of this tribe, which shares the ethos that I've thought about a lot in my time as a consultant, as a journalist, and it's inspiring to see business leaders who truly embrace the principles behind conscious capitalism. I'm here today to talk to you about the future of women in work post-Me Too. As Dave said, I co-founded a nonprofit called The Press Forward, and I want to tell you our story, and I'm also going to tell you some lessons learned after working on these issues for 2 years for leaders who have the chance to make an impact in their workforce. First of all, I have to start 2 years ago today. I was a management consultant on Wall Street. My client was a bank. All of a sudden, I get a text from one of my friends that a very famous and powerful newsman had lost his job because he had serially harassed his colleagues. Years ago, I had been one of them, and I was a young journalist, and there were many reasons that I chose to pivot my career. The industry was being disrupted. I had an interest in actually solving problems and just reporting on them, but that experience contributed to why I left news. And I didn't understand that this was a legal issue. I thought it was a moral one, that somehow I had to navigate my dignity or advancement. And I also didn't think that my body should be transactional or my beauty my worth. And then Matt Lauer fell. And then Charlie Rose fell, and Michael Oreskes at NPR, and you started to see all these icons that were supposed to be holding the powerful to account, who were actually abusing their power behind the scenes. Journalists were powerful, changing the world with their own reporting, but the good work of journalists also exposed that even their own were vulnerable to abuses of power. So then I started to think about the larger issue that this reporting exposed really a fault line in the industry, which is that 2/3 of journalists who are women will be harassed sometime during their career, most likely at work, and it won't be reported. And this is coupled by the fact that 2/3 of journalism school graduates are women, and yet they comprise only 1/3 of the industry, and they're a fraction of leadership. It's even worse for people of color. And then I also started digging into the science and reflected that harassment's actually not necessarily about gender, it's about power. And women have been disproportionately impacted because we haven't been in positions of power. And so these issues aren't simply one of women's issues, it's one of human decency. And truly the worst thing that can happen is that these issues become politicized. So what happened next can truly only be described as a brief moment of wondrous time during the Me Too movement. Many of the women who told their stories publicly and privately began to come together over social media. They created the Time's Up movement. Journalists in our industry created Press Forward. And we decided that we wanted to come together and call for change. And the turning point for me was truly when I had the courage to go to some of the newsroom leaders who I'd worked with. And I had said, this happened to me. It was awful. I didn't know my rights. Thank you for letting me know I could have come forward. Here's some things that could have worked better. Let's work together to make sure this doesn't happen to your staff in the future. And they said, thank you so much for telling us. I'm sorry that happened to you. Things are different now. You seem successful, and good luck. And it was very clear to me that they were willing to report on the outside, but not change from within. And there needed to be a voice that called for ethical workplaces within our own news industry. So as we watched the stories evolve, and we were disappointed by reactions from industry leaders, we came together to call for change. 12 other co-founders formed a group called the Press Forward, and we launched early 2018 at the National Press Club. So during the passion of the Me Too movement, we really captured this vision that we were committed to enabling, and at a high level, it's that we envision a workplace culture in which journalists uphold the integrity of the press by working together in a way that's civil, safe, fair, and void of harassment and abuse of power, where men and women of diverse backgrounds are treated with parity. Because harassment was really just the tip of the iceberg. It tends to occur in environments where there's disrespect, where there's inequality, where there's discrimination, where there's incivility and bullying, where industry is being disrupted, your business model's not sound, you work long hours, there's screaming and yelling, on top of the fact that journalists cover some of the most intense issues that we have to face, from life and death to abuses of power to school shootings. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, because healthy newsrooms mean a healthy democracy. So it's not that exciting, but we felt what would lead to systemic change came down to 5 things. The first was training. And we launched, this week, we launched a research and evidence-based curriculum with the Poynter Institute to innovate sexual harassment training. We spent 1.5 years developing it, and we wanted to make sure that it was actually effective. We also knew that we needed data and research. Also this Tuesday, we partnered with McKinsey and leanin.org, which released their annual Women in the Workplace study. Because as I said, these issues are about power, and women haven't been in positions of power, but we need better data to understand why aren't they in the pipeline to leadership. So this fall, we'll be releasing a study. The first time it's ever been accomplished, we onboarded 8 national news organizations across outlets to look at the status of women in American newsrooms and what can be done to elevate them into leadership. We also knew that there needed to be thought, leadership, and dialogue. A lot of men were feeling pretty unsafe, and we wanted to let them know that one of our values is that we have a love for guys, and if you're a normal person, you'll probably be okay. That these issues were committed by egregious acts, but the underlying systemic problems that led to harassment were actually about unhealthy workplace cultures, which affected a lot of people. So we spoke on numerous panels, fireside chats in newsrooms, and began making resources available on our website for journalists across the country. And then we also worked with journalism schools. So we wanted to make sure that young journalists understood their rights, but we also knew that this is where true change was going to happen. Studies show that this is when our deepest views on ethics are formed, are actually at the undergraduate level. By the time you're in your 30s to 60s, it's actually too late. And so you have to focus on systems and processes and policies at the corporate level. And lastly, the Legal Defense Fund, we knew that was a really critical mechanism for change to make sure that journalists had access to legal advice. The average journalist makes about $32,000 a year, and they don't necessarily have access to a lawyer, so we needed to make sure that they had resources. We've been assisted by the help of amazing partners, news luminaries, on our advisory board. We've spoken to universities across the country, and we've brought industry to the next generation. This is CNN's anchor, Allison Cameretta. And we also speak behind the scenes to news leaders. This is managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, who's one of our advisory board members, and we continue to give them advice behind the scenes. You know, I'd be lying if I said that this was easy. I never wanted to talk out about these issues. Who wants to be known for this stuff, right? And I was telling my mom right before we launched the National Press Club, you know, there had been men in my workplace who'd said, like, you don't really want to be known for that, guys won't want to work with you. And then I saw the numbers, and to Cynthia's point, I got really pissed off and decided to do something. But the turning point for me was when my mother said to me, well, you know what? There's a lot of women around the world who would be killed for what you're doing. You live in a country where you have the chance to use your voice. And she's right. And Dave's right. After all these years, even though I'm not a journalist anymore, I am, because we're committed to being a voice to the voiceless. And at this moment, the voiceless were actually journalists in our own newsroom. There were women journalists across the world who face much worse things than we do. And so I had no choice. Enough is enough. So what are the lessons learned after 2 years that I can share with you that might be helpful in your own organization as you think about what you can do to make change? Because the reality is, I'm not going to be the change. You all are going to be. You all will have an impact on your workforce and the culture and the conversations you have behind the scenes with your other colleagues and peers about how to make things better for women across America. And the first thing is that culture is shaped by communication and leadership. So communication is what you say and also what you don't say. So even if a scandal hasn't happened on your watch, even if there hasn't been some sort of ethical breach, it's still an opportunity when news breaks in a story like this and all the people who've surprised you with these stories to let your company and your employees and your stakeholders know what you stand for, what your policies are, where to go if you faced any issues during your careers. And by saying something, you set the tone. And then the second thing when we say leadership is truly set by who you put into positions of leadership. So if you have a talented salesperson who also bullies their colleagues, but is a great individual contributor, and you promote them, that sets the tone. But if you promote someone into a position of leadership who demonstrates that they care for their employees, that they believe in strong management principles, that also sets the culture. The second lesson learned is that we need more women in leadership. Studies show that harassment occurs when it's a very male-dominated hierarchy. There's a lot of research right now on how to crack this, but at a high level, it shouldn't be rocket science. It shouldn't take 208 years to get more women into leadership. And the biggest difference you can make here, according to a lot of work right now, is to focus on the systems and processes and evaluate and hold accountable managers on hiring and promotion processes, especially at that first level, that they actually will have a huge impact on who gets into the pipeline. Look, no one goes into work thinking that they're going to discriminate against women or people of color. And it's no secret, though, that as leaders, we like people who are like us and make us feel good. And so if you look around and your leadership team has women, but maybe they're your COO or the CMO or somebody who's enabling your vision, and you're not surrounding yourself or really elevating women in your company to be visionary, then maybe you have a bias. And also, invest in the work. Industry spends billions modernizing IT. It's what I did before the Me Too movement. But we underinvest in modernizing our mindsets and changing who we see as leaders. We have a perception of who we think should lead. Let's be different about who we think can actually be innovative about the future. And lastly, this is truly about power. The science shows, again, that harassment is about power. So we became fascinated with this notion that when you gain influence over the states of others, which is the definition of power, you actually, the science shows, begin to lose empathy. You begin to lose the same traits that were good, that allowed you to gain into a position of leadership. And instead, some behaviors surface, such as men tend to think that women are more attracted to them than they are. They might harass their colleagues. They start screaming at people. You're mean to your kids because you lose that empathy. The brain chemistry actually changes. In order to overcome this, some research suggests there's a few things you can do. One, you need to be aware of your feelings of power. So even just recognizing that you can influence the state of someone else is the first step. The second is to practice humility. The third is to stay focused on others and to give, to practice respect. And then lastly, and most interestingly for journalism, it's to share your power and to focus on the powerless in your organization to give your employees a voice. In journalist case, it's to be a voice to the voiceless. Maybe stop focusing coverage on who we think is the most powerful and finding the stories of those who don't have a voice and give them one so that they can rise to dignity that we all deserve. And then again, I won't be the change, Press Forward won't be the change, workplaces will be. It's really a leadership issue. All of these issues come down to leadership. If you look at how people have responded to the Me Too movement, the companies that have done well and those that have not, those who truly understood what these issues were about and truly cared about the people in their workplace, we think responded really well. Those who didn't have their own checks on power did not. Also, change will take time and resources. And we need all of you to play a part in this journey. Thank you very much.